If your abusive ex turned himself invisible so he could torture you into getting back together, what would you do? I'm going to break down the mistakes made by Cecilia, what she should have done differently, and how to beat the psycho stalker in The Invisible Man. Adrian is obsessed with controlling everyone around him, from what they eat and what they wear to what they say and even think. It's his way or no way, and he'll punish anyone who disagrees. He's also extremely wealthy and has access to cutting-edge technology, making him a real pain in the ass when it comes to Christmas shopping, not to mention stalking. It's 3:42 in the morning and Cecilia is wide awake, careful not to disturb her man, Adrian, sleeping beside her. She slowly crawls out of bed and retrieves a pill container from under the mattress. It's diazepam. Cecilia tiptoes around the bed to confirm whether Adrian drank any of the water she laced, swishing it around to reveal the powdery substance floating inside. After dumping the rest of the laced water down the bathroom sink, Cecilia retrieves a bug-out bag stashed in her closet and tops it off with cash, medication, and valuable documents. She skulks through the darkened corridors of the massive modern home, disabling the surveillance system and deactivating the alarm before quickly getting dressed. Cecilia exits through the open garage door when a noise from behind brings her to a dead stop. Fortunately, it's just a doggo. Poor Zeus can't come with her, but she decides to remove his shock collar before saying goodbye. No good deed going unpunished. Zeus accidentally boops the expensive Audi parked behind him, triggering the alarm and sending Cecilia sprinting for the edge of the property. She scales the concrete retaining wall and runs into a nearby forest, coming to a stop in the middle of a dirt road. She looks around in equal parts frustration and fear until a pair of headlights appear in the distance. The car stops beside her and she quickly jumps in, accidentally dropping the bottle of diazepam in the process. Failing to sense Cecilia's urgency, the driver, her sister Emily, decides now's an appropriate time to start asking questions. Suddenly, Adrian comes sprinting up to the passenger side window, demanding Cecilia open the door before punching clean through the glass and grabbing her by the shirt. Emily finally realizes all is not okay and stomps on the accelerator, leaving Cecilia's attacker screaming in the rearview mirror. With Adrian in pursuit, now is the perfect excuse to visit and buy land in Scotland from our video sponsor, Established Titles. With Established Titles, you can purchase as little as 1 square foot of Scottish land, so you can officially be pronounced as Lord or Lady. Established Titles commits to planting a tree with each order and to preserve the beautiful woodlands of Scotland by supporting global charities like One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future. There are different title packages you can purchase. Each one comes with at least 1 square foot of dedicated land on a private estate in Ardally, Aberdeenshire, Scotland, and an official certificate with a crest. You get a certificate proving your title, as well as a unique plot number with which you can see the exact location of your land. With getting the certificate, you could officially change your name to Lord or Lady and get it on your credit card, plane tickets, and other forms of credentials. With it being the holiday season, this is also the best last-minute gift ever. I mean, who wouldn't want to be officially titled Lord or Lady? For those with a Scottish heritage, this is also a great way to connect with their family roots. Established Titles is having a major holiday sale. You can get 80% off, plus they're giving my soon-to-be nerd lads and lasses an additional 10% off by clicking my link in the description, establishedtitles.com/nerd, and using my code NERD. This is a great gift for everyone, especially the environmentalist and tree lover in your family or friend group. Adrian is supposedly a violent control freak who won't let Cecilia leave his fortress of a house. He's kind of like Alex from the movie Tao, except he doesn't abduct young women and experiment on them, at least as far as we know. He probably tries to micromanage Cecilia's relationships and outside influences, likely having anything she needs delivered to the house and making any Adrian-approved friends come over rather than let her go out. There's even evidence of this in the garage. With only an Audi R8 and 2 motorcycles, Cecilia doesn't appear to have a personal vehicle, and I doubt Adrian lets her cruise around town in the R8 or go joyriding on one of the bikes. While Cecilia planning her escape ahead of time is refreshing, her plan is overcomplicated and potentially unnecessary. I'm going to rule out straight up murdering Adrian and trying to make it look like an accident, as that's extremely difficult to pull off and would likely result in her going to prison, especially with all the cameras recording throughout the house. We don't know the full backstory, but it doesn't seem out of the question for Cecilia to collect video and audio evidence of Adrian's abusive behavior with her phone, and then call the police to report it as a domestic violence situation. After all, she was able to contact her sister to arrange the pickup. Law enforcement would escort Cecilia from the premises, and she could then file a restraining order her against him. However, it's possible Adrian has connections in high places, considering he's a famous billionaire, tech entrepreneur, and the local cops might be on his payroll or beholden to some kind of John Wick type terms. So let's break down each step of Cecilia's great escape and see how she could have carried them out with less risk. Step 1. Acquire Adrian's password for the security system without him knowing. Adrian likely used strong materials Cecilia couldn't easily break through, like Lexan polycarbonate for the windows, concrete for the walls, and steel for the doors, which are remotely locked, I presume. I can't see why he'd give her the password to the security system, and he doesn't seem like the type to leave it on a sticky note or use his dog's name followed by his birth date. None of the cameras were pointed at the keyboard in his lab either, so she couldn't have watched him type it in. I can't figure out how Cecilia could have obtained the password if Adrian was even remotely protective over it, which realistically would have ruined this part of the plan, but evidently she must have found a way. Step 2. Acquire a prescription for diazepam without Adrian becoming suspicious. Unfortunately for society, but fortunately for Cecilia, this shouldn't be too difficult to accomplish nowadays. Step 3. Arrange for Emily to pick her up on the road just outside Adrian's property line. If it were me, I'd want Emily to arrive ahead of time and then provide a signal that it was her, like flashing her high beams in a 1-2-1 pattern so I could recognize her car. Step 4. Stash a go bag in the closet vents with important items ahead of time. Step 5. Lace the glass of water on Adrian's nightstand with crushed up diazepam. Diazepam is practically insoluble in water. Typically, it takes about 5 to 15 milligrams to serve as a sufficient sleep aid, which means we need over 20 cups of water to dissolve it to unnoticeable levels. How Adrian didn't see all that white dust in his water, I don't know. Step 6. Hide the diazepam bottle and wait an hour for the drugs to take effect. Step 7. Empty the rest of the laced water down the bathroom sink. Not sure about this one. Adrian will probably put 2 and 2 together when he realizes Cecilia is gone. Besides, it's not like he could actually have her charged for poisoning. For all anyone can prove, he could have been stealing from her prescription to feed his own habits. Clanging the glass on the vanity and running the sink only put the whole plan at risk. Step 8. Grab the go bag from the closet vent and hide the pill bottle inside. That bag should have already been fully packed and double checked, and again, there's no reason to waste time hiding the diazepam. Step 9. Reorient a nearby security camera to keep an eye on Adrian. It would be good to know if Adrian wakes up prematurely, but messing around with a folding stool to reach the camera risks making a lot of noise. Besides, once the security's down, we should be quietly hauling ass no matter what, so the camera feed is pretty much useless at that point. Step 10. Tiptoe into the basement lab. Watch where you're walking. What's the point in constantly looking over your shoulder? You know he's still in bed based on the surveillance app. Our primary focus should be not knocking shit over that might wake him up. Step 11. Type in his password to disable the security system. There's probably a limited password attempt feature, so Cecilia not accidentally fat fingering the wrong key under stress was crucial. Step 12. Turn off all cameras except the one facing the bed. The first thing Adrian would likely do upon discovering Cecilia's escape is check the camera feeds. She didn't reset his password or anything though, so he could just reactivate the cameras from the app. Decent idea, poor execution. Step 13. Go back upstairs to change her clothes. You are fleeing for your life. It's okay to get a bit chilly jogging 10 minutes to the getaway driver. Shoes are a necessity though, especially given the perimeter walls in the forest she'll have to run through. Step 14. Say goodbye to the doggo. I'd maybe allow for a couple last minute pets, which realistically shouldn't be a problem because a simple butt boop wouldn't be enough to trigger a car alarm. However, there's no point in removing the shock collar. The entire property is surrounded by 8-foot concrete walls, and we aren't hauling poor Zeus over them. Step 15. Run 50 yards to an 8-foot concrete perimeter wall and vault it. If Adrian wanted to keep Cecilia in, he probably shouldn't have had the concrete wall ornately carved with perfect handholds. The top was also edged out to give her a perfect grip. Step 16. Run a mile through the forest to a road where Emily is supposed to pick her up. Gassing out a few minutes into her escape is pathetic and easily could have landed her back in Adrian's dungeon. There's a reason cardio is rule number 1. Waving the flashlight all over the tree line is a huge mistake. This screws up your night vision and provides a beacon for your violent, psycho boyfriend to hone in on. I would keep the light off unless I really needed it, and I'd definitely avoid shooting the beam back towards Adrian's house. Standing in the middle of the street waiting for the first car to show up, which easily could have been Adrian or his evil butler like in Ready or Not, is also a big mistake. I'd be hiding in the tree line until a car arrived and gave me some kind of pre-designated signal. Cecilia's final mistake is not informing the getaway driver that she is, in fact, a getaway driver who should have been at the evac location ahead of time, and also choosing an idiot who thinks the first thing to do when attacked is start asking stupid stupid questions like, what is going on? Well, Emily, there seems to be a violent, deranged psychopath pursuing me and assaulting your vehicle. Would you kindly ferry me away from the danger? No one's picking 4 a.m. to meet for a girls' night. Realistically, Adrian would not have been able to break through the window with his fist. Doesn't mean we want to hang around for a tea party with a dude coming at us like a zombie from World War Z though. Fast forward a while and Cecilia is staying with her cop friend James. After a brief pep talk, she walks out the front door for the first time in 2 weeks, but the sound of an approaching jogger drives her back inside. I would not be staying with a close friend if I didn't want to be found by my psycho stalker ex. It's probably the first place he would look. I get that years of unemployment and psychological torture might make it difficult to afford a new place to live, but that's why I would have swiped some extra cash and valuables from Adrian's house to finance my retreat to Thailand. Only problem is that Adrian's a smart guy with access to near unlimited resources, so the best and really only option is to go public with our story. If we lie low, it's easy for a predator to keep us cornered. If we don't want to end up at dirt temperature like Rachel in House of Cards, we need to speak up and make our situation a media scandal. After the 60 Minutes interview about our captivity in Adrian's house, we'd be untouchable. Emily shows up to deliver some important news. At first, Cecilia is deeply upset at her sister's arrival, claiming Adrian knows where Emily lives and could have followed her over. Her panic gives way to relief when she sees the article claiming her abusive window-punching ex has recently self-deleted. Finally able to get some fresh air without fearing for her personal safety, Cecilia checks the mail to find a letter addressed to her, even though nobody's supposed to know where she's staying. It's a notice to heirs from the state of California. Receiving a letter from the state, despite no one knowing our location, should be rather alarming. Besides, an official government document would only be sent to her permanent address. Given she could barely make it to the sidewalk, I highly doubt Cecilia found the nerve to wait 4 hours at the DMV so she could put James's address on her driver's license. Another red flag is how quickly the letter arrived. The article reporting Adrian's death was only 40 minutes old when Cecilia saw it. Even if it were written a few days after the fact, it would still probably be a while before she was notified, provided they could even track her down. I would have ignored the notice entirely and started looking for a new hiding place. Adrian could have had powerful friends or family members that hold us responsible for his suicide. Responding to the letter would inform the sender that we are indeed where they believe us to be, potentially putting our hosts at risk as well. Prompted by the letter, Cecilia and Emily meet with Adrian's brother, Tom, to discuss the terms of his will. Tom reveals that despite Adrian's anger over Cecilia quite justifiably running out on him, his will states she is to receive $100,000 per month from his estate over the next 4 years, tax-free. Cecilia celebrates her sudden windfall with James and his daughter, Sydney, by naming her as the recipient of a college fund, into which $10,000 will be deposited each month. After commemorating the occasion with a little champagne, Cecilia finds herself alone. She's suddenly overcome by the feeling she's being watched, but a quick scan of her surroundings reveals nothing out of the ordinary. While cooking breakfast the next morning, Cecilia steps away from the kitchen to get Sydney out of bed. Almost as soon as she turns her back, the gas burner inexplicably cranks itself up to 11. Cecilia walks back in to find a full-blown grease fire. Before she can douse the flames with water and burn the entire house down, Sydney comes in clutch with a fire extinguisher and saves the day. That night, Cecilia is working on her laptop when the sound of footsteps in the hallway draws her attention to the door. She calls out thinking it might be James, but there's no response. Cecilia gets up to investigate. The soft footfalls lead her to the kitchen, but there's no sign of anyone around. She then hears the front door unlock and swing open on its own, prompting her to walk outside to, I guess, confront whoever might be out there. Seeing nothing that would explain the bizarre circumstances, Cecilia returns inside and locks the door. Burning some bacon and having feelings of being watched could be explained away as an accident or general anxiety. A chain lock being undone and the front door swinging open by itself cannot. Cecilia is making the same mistake as Alex in Creep, walking outside to search for a stalker while leaving the front door wide open behind her. There is absolutely no reason to go outside and investigate. Stalkers aside, home invasions are a fairly common occurrence, especially if word got out about her inheritance. After shutting and locking the front door, I would have shut myself in my room and called James to inform him of the situation. He could then have cleared the house with his duty pistol. Sometime later, we find Cecilia asleep next to Sydney. Someone or something pulls the covers towards the foot of the bed, causing Cecilia to stir before the sight of a dressed mannequin scares her wide awake. Cecilia gets out of bed to replace the covers when she notices what looks like indentations on the cushion of a nearby chair. She casts a sheet over the chair out of suspicion, but it fails to reveal anything alarming. Relieved, Cecilia goes to remake the bed, but finds the blanket pinned to the floor by what looks like a pair of invisible feet. To her horror, car, the feet begin stepping towards her. Suddenly, an unseen force rips the fabric from Cecilia's fingers, sending her clattering into the nightstand behind her. James is on the scene immediately, but seeing no sign of an intruder, he attributes Cecilia's claims of invisible footprints to the extreme stress she's been under. Trying to sympathize with her situation, he warns her not to let Adrian haunt her and suggests she get some sleep ahead of her important job interview tomorrow. Taken by itself, it's possible to write off the encounter with the blanket as the product of a stress-induced nightmare or some kind of waking dream. But alongside the front door swinging open by itself, the stove turning itself up, and the mysterious footsteps echoing throughout the house at night, it's much harder to dismiss. While James is trustworthy and seems like a capable protector, Cecilia's anxiety and paranoid suspicion of Adrian still being alive is at minimum disruptive, if not potentially dangerous. We should use some of the trust money to get our own place nearby, and then hire some executive protection, like seals on security until things return to normal. The following day at the interview, Cecilia opens her briefcase to show him some work samples, only it's empty. She begins breathing heavily before collapsing onto the floor and blacking out. After visiting the hospital, Cecilia is told not to drive for a few days, but otherwise she appears to be totally fine, pending the results of a blood test. James drives her back home, and soon enough, a phone call interrupts her stress shower with the news of her lab report. To her surprise, the doctor tells Cecilia that her fainting was likely caused by the high levels of diazepam present in her system. Her confusion turns to panic when she discovers the blood-stained pill bottle sitting on the bathroom sink, the very same bottle she dropped while fleeing from Adrian at the beginning of the movie. Back at Tom's office, Cecilia demands he tells Adrian to leave her alone. She explains that Adrian once told her that if she ever left him, he would hunt her down and give her a sign he was watching her. She then sets the bottle of diazepam on the desk, admitting she used it to drug Adrian before losing it during her escape. Tom and James are incredulous at the notion that Adrian rose from the dead to return her anxiety medication. Cecilia goes on to say that she doesn't believe Adrian is dead, but rather that he used his expertise in the field of optics technology to turn himself invisible. Tom suggests Adrian must have deliberately planted this idea in Cecilia's head to torment her once he could no longer do so himself. He then produces photographic evidence of Adrian's grisly demise, assuring Cecilia he's gone for good. Now that Cecilia basically knows for a fact Adrian is stalking her, going to Tom with this information is a bad idea. If it's true, then one could only assume that they're working together, and now they both know that she knows what's going on. I would have played off the discovery of the pill bottle with feigned confusion, giving Adrian the impression I thought I was going crazy. If he feels like we're onto him, it might escalate the situation. It's better to let him think he has the upper hand while we figure out a way to beat him. Instead of airing my grievances with Tom, I'd take this opportunity to make a tactical retreat and stock up on some firepower. Staying with our friends and family members only puts them in harm's way, so a drastic change of scenery is likely our best option. Cecilia already suspects Adrian of being able to turn himself invisible, suggesting she does have some inkling as to the type of work he does. This seems likely as she appeared to be somewhat familiar with his laboratory during her escape, and Adrian did have many suits in his lab. Hell, he even had an entire arm piece with all sorts of little modules all over it. Drawing back to the news article about Adrian's death, it said Adrian was working on tech that calibrated multi-cameras with refractive projection and ray tracing. Maybe it's the nerd in me, but with the suits, this sounds like a way to project his surroundings on his suit. It's a jump, but would explain the happenings. At minimum, it's worth testing. Adrian's advanced camera technology might enable him to make himself invisible, but he could still show up on infrared. Even if the cloaking device somehow masks his body heat, we know from earlier that his breath is clearly visible, which would be roughly the same temperature as the rest of him. If I were Cecilia, I'd purchase a high-end Noveski AR-15, a variable power pulsar Thermion 2 thermal imaging XP50 rifle scope, a few cases of 5.56 green tip, and a shit pile of Magpul PMags, and then take an urban rifle course at the local training facility. This loadout would enable us to readily spot Adrian, even at a distance. Plus, the scope's built-in camera can record the surprised look on his face right before we blow it off, and provide hard evidence of the encounter. It's unlikely Adrian's suit could stop high-powered rifle rounds. Even with NIJ level 4 body armor, enough rounds at point-blank range will inevitably hit something vital, or at the very least, damage his suit enough to make him visible, kind of like how John Wick defeated the High Table Enforcers. With the $100,000 per month we're receiving from Adrian's estate, all of this would be easily affordable. We won't be able to purchase the rifle in California, so we'll need to move to Nevada, which we definitely have the money to do. Ideally, we'd move into an apartment as there'd be less overall area to keep secure. From there, we could set up a network of thermal cameras and even hire the executive security team I mentioned before. At the very least, least, we need to pick up a few guard dogs, which should be able to detect intruders based on scent alone. We could even try to rescue the good boy Zeus for that role, although I'd want to be heavily armed before I went anywhere near Adrian's house again. Cecilia arrives at her sister's apartment to spread more Adrian-inspired ghost stories, but she's met with an ice cold reception. Apparently, Emily received an insult-ridden email from Cecilia accusing her of lusting after the inheritance money. Frustrated and confused, Cecilia insists the email must have come from Adrian, but Emily's not buying it. She tells Cecilia to get medicated and slams the door in her face. Upon returning home, Cecilia immediately checks her sent emails for any sign of the alleged nastygram. Sure enough, the most recent email is addressed to her sister, and damn, it's no wonder she's pissed off. Stop blaming things on Adrian without hard evidence. It's just gonna make everyone think you're crazy, allowing him to get away with more harassment. Ghost stories aside, if Cecilia really wanted Emily out of her life, why would she go and see her in person? Given everything Cecilia's been through and how out of character this is, you'd think Emily would have at least called after receiving the message. For somebody who asks a million questions during a midnight getaway, she sure was quick to take the ranting email at face value. This should be a clear indication that Adrian is attempting to isolate Cecilia from her support structure to make her even more vulnerable, likely similar to when they were together. I'd reach out to everyone I was in recent contact with and tell them my email was hacked by a stalker and not to open or trust anything they received from me. I'd then change my password or even delete my account altogether and create a new one to stop Adrian from destroying my support group. Seeing her friend is deeply distressed, Sydney offers to spend some girl time with Cecilia one-on-one. Before the two of them can run off to enjoy some cake, Sydney is seemingly struck in the face by an invisible fist. Believing Cecilia to be the source of the blow, Sydney screams for her father while crawling away in abject horror. James enters the room and immediately puts himself between his frightened daughter and her perceived attacker. Cecilia pleads with her friends, swearing it was all Adrian's doing, but James won't have it. He tells her to go stay at her sister's before leaving to take Sydney somewhere she hopefully won't be punched in the face at. Desperate and alone, Cecilia demands Adrian show himself. She then proceeds to grab a butcher knife and a bag of coffee grounds, spreading them out on the hardwood in hopes that they'll capture Adrian's footprints. She then backs herself into a corner and sits down on the floor. Adrian's not going to attack Cecilia outright, that much is clear. He doesn't want her to look like a victim. On the contrary, he wants to make her look like a threat to everyone around her. It's important that Cecilia maintains her innocence, but without any evidence to back up her claims that Adrian is alive and assaulting her loved ones, she can't expect anyone to believe her. I think the best thing we can do now is to give them some space while we search for a way to exonerate ourselves. It makes sense to try and expose Adrian's movements using the coffee grounds, but backing into a corner and sitting down is a really dumb idea. Even if Cecilia saw Adrian's footprints as he sprinted towards her, there's no way she could have reacted from that position in time to fend him off. It's like the 21-foot rule, but instead of drawing a gun from a holster, she has to pick up a knife, uncross her legs, and jump to her feet before Adrian can cross a small room. Adrian also has time on his side. Why would he walk into an obvious ambush when he can just wait for Cecilia to leave the room? Plus, James is eventually going to return home and demand she get the hell out. If I were Cecilia, I would lock myself in the bathroom as quickly as possible, keeping the knife in one hand and my phone recording in the other, in case Adrian tries to come in after us. After a brief one-sided diatribe, Cecilia gets tired of waiting, crawling over to a nearby landline and dialing Adrian's phone number. Sure enough, she hears something vibrating nearby, realizing it's coming from directly above her. Using the ladder she bought for James, Cecilia climbs into the attic and dials Adrian's phone again, finding it lying face up beside a set of keys. A quick scan of the recent pictures reveals photos of her and Sydney sleeping next to one another, likely from the other night. Cecilia also finds the jumping kitchen knife from her disastrous attempted breakfast, along with the missing folder containing her work samples. Adrian's phone vibrates again, displaying a text from an unknown number. Surprise. I'm not sure why Cecilia would expect Adrian to keep his phone on while stalking her, but it was worth a shot. Instead of climbing up to investigate, I would have waited for James to come back so I could show him what we figured out. The fact that it's Adrian's number would at the very least suggest to James the situation is not all it seems to be, possibly even convincing him we weren't responsible for striking his daughter after all. Despite my hesitations to pop my head into the attic, if Adrian wanted to kill us, he probably would have done it already, so going up to retrieve potentially useful evidence is somewhat reasonable. It also doesn't make sense for Adrian to keep photos of Cecilia and Sydney on his phone like that. I get that he's trying to scare her, but the photos just lend her something she could potentially use to clear her name. A noise from behind draws her attention back to the ladder. Cecilia peers into the house below and sees nothing. She then decides to dump a nearby bucket of paint down the hatch for good measure. Realizing he's lost his main advantage, The now visible man scrambles down the ladder in retreat, his hurried footsteps echoing throughout the house. Cecilia drops her kitchen knife to the floor below and climbs down. She spots a trail of wet paint leading to the kitchen, where it sounds like the intruder is rinsing off. Rounding the corner, Cecilia finds the kitchen sink splattered with white paint. Suddenly, an invisible hand seizes her by the throat, lifting her off the ground and slamming her against the wall. Cecilia fights back as hard as she can while getting tossed around like a ragdoll. She finally manages to kick her way to some nearby dishes, shattering them over her assailant and buying herself enough time to escape through the front door. Using the paint like that was a smart move, but unfortunately, Cecilia was not mentally prepared to follow up with a knife attack the moment she exposed Adrian's position. It's too bad. We could have really done some damage from that angle. Once the ladder was knocked away, there was no reason for her to leave the attic. There was only one entrance and Adrian would not be able to reach it without taking a kitchen knife straight to the eye socket. Now that we have proof Adrian, or at least somebody with access to his cell phone, was secretly photographing us while we slept, we can prove to those around us we were legitimately being stalked. All we have to do now is call the police and tell them we found an intruder living in the attic, which is a thing that happens disturbingly often. They might even be able to review the phone's location history to uncover where Adrian has been planning his operation. It doesn't necessarily remove him as a threat, but it gets more eyes watching our back and the situation at large. Dropping the knife down the hatch before dangling from the ceiling like a human piñata was about as dumb as it gets. In such a vulnerable position, Adrian wouldn't even need to be invisible to get the drop on us. If I just had to come down, I would have simply dropped through the opening while still holding the knife. A fall like that should barely faze a healthy young adult. At the very least, we should have called the police first. It would be nice to have some backup on our way if things get nasty, and a few witnesses seeing us wrestle a floating blob of paint would really back up our story. I know it's tempting to try to get things over with, but once we see the trail of paint stopping at the kitchen sink, we should have retreated to a secure position and waited for help to arrive. Even if he were still visible, Adrian is much bigger and stronger than us, and he could easily have armed himself with the knife from the kitchen. Once he got a hold of her, there really wasn't much Cecilia could have done. Honestly, she's just lucky he did the typical boss villain routine of tossing her around until she landed next to something she could hit him with. Knowing when to quit and exercise a little run fu was definitely the right idea. As soon as I made it outside, I would try to draw as much attention as possible while I waited for the police to arrive. Invisible or not, Adrian probably won't try anything with the whole neighborhood watching. Cecilia is likely covered in bruises from the recent altercation, and coupled with the photos of the cell phone she found, there's more than enough evidence to prove that she's been stalked and now assaulted. We need to make sure this is all officially documented in case things get even worse or we wind up disappearing. After fleeing into the night, Cecilia uses her cell phone to summon a rideshare to Adrian's house. She tells the driver to hang around and ventures into the compound. I understand the need to find evidence that proves it's Adrian who's been stalking us, but I'm not so sure returning to his home is such a great idea. He would almost certainly be monitoring the extensive surveillance system, so it's only a matter of time before he shows up. That is, if he's not already clinging to the bottom of the Uber like Cape Fear. I'd say we'd be better off heading for Nevada to get strapped like I mentioned earlier. Skulking through her former home, Cecilia is reunited with her old pal Zeus. The two of them make their way to the abandoned laboratory containing a locked storage room. Cecilia guesses the access code and enters to find a large rack seemingly meant for a man-sized object. She interacts with a nearby control panel and, much to her horror, confirms what she already knew. Just as Cecilia begins stripping the suits from the mannequin underneath, she hears Zeus barking in the distance, suggesting she's no longer alone. Cecilia stashes the pilfered cloaking device in the master bedroom closet. The door slides open behind her. She sees a pair of invisible feet impress upon the carpet before getting violently thrown across the hard marble floor. Before Adrian can dish out another beatdown, Zeus comes to Cecilia's aid, giving her an opportunity to run like hell back to the car. Apparently, Adrian made almost no effort to hide what he was working on. It's unclear why he would just leave a spare invisibility suit behind a single locked door with an easily guessable password. We should have immediately put on the other suit as soon as we found it. In the time it took for us to run to the master bedroom and stash it in the closet, we probably could have been fully kitted up. Even if we couldn't figure out how to activate it right then and there, we could have at least taken it to the police along with all the other evidence we gathered. Back in the city, Cecilia sits alone in a crowded upscale restaurant, surrounded by scores of well-to-do diners enjoying the luxury of not being hunted down by an invisible psychopath. Apparently, having forgiven Cecilia for the terrible email she didn't didn't actually send. Emily walks into the restaurant and sits down at the table. Cecilia explains that she went to Adrian's house and found something that can prove that he's been stalking her all this time. Emily's eyes suddenly shift to something over Cecilia's shoulder. There's a chef's knife seemingly floating in midair behind her. The blade then glides across the table, slashing Emily's throat before planting itself in Cecilia's outstretched hand. In seconds, she finds herself pinned down by the police. It was a huge mistake going to meet with Emily. We've already established that Adrian knows where she lives and would likely follow her to find Cecilia. I can see why such a public location might seem like the best place to meet, but Adrian's invisible, so what's to stop him from sprinkling cyanide in the salad dressing? If I just had to meet with Emily, I would have picked one of the many beaches in the area. This way, we'd still be meeting in a somewhat public place, and the sand would reveal Adrian's footprints if he got anywhere near us, which would likely be enough to convince Emily we were right all along. After being taken into custody, Cecilia is lashed to a hospital bed and forcibly sedated, hearing a disembodied man's voice whisper, "Surprise," just before losing consciousness. Sometime later, Cecilia finds out she's pregnant from a member of the medical staff during a routine checkup, saying it likely occurred within the last month. Making matters worse, Cecilia is brought by the staff to meet with Tom. He informs her that because she's been charged with allegedly murdering his sister, she will no longer be receiving the $5 million from Adrian's trust. Then, in a whisper, Tom explains that if Cecilia just keeps the baby and comes back to Adrian, all her problems will disappear. He goes on to say that Adrian feels like she's been punished enough and is willing to take her back. Despite the hard sell, Cecilia literally swats the deal off the table, covertly swiping one of the metal pens from Tom's briefcase as he turns to pick up his things. Either Tom is complicit in faking Adrian's death and running cover for him, or he actually killed Adrian to take over his company and stalk Cecilia. The latter doesn't make sense though. We've seen no indication that Tom is infatuated with Cecilia to the point of stalking her, much less dismantling her entire life to force her into a commitment. If I had to guess, I'd say Adrian is probably manipulating Tom into helping him. Back in her cell, Cecilia retrieves the pen from its hiding spot and turns on the shower. She informs whoever's listening that they won't get her or the baby and plunges it into her wrist, dragging it down the length of her forearm. An invisible hand latches onto her bleeding wrist, pulling it away in a bid to quell her suicide attempt. Finally knowing where to strike, Cecilia thrusts the pen into her stalker and forces him onto the floor. She manages to land a few more stabs before he kicks her away, damaging his suit in the process. Sneaking back to our cell with the pen was a great move, but did we really have to drag it down her arm like that? Fanning the room with our bed sheets would have been a far less painful way to accomplish the same thing. Adrian should not have gotten himself locked in a small room with Cecilia like that. It's not like she could go anywhere. He was just asking to get exposed by the inevitable altercation. I'm glad Cecilia was smart enough to keep stabbing him once she had him down. All too often, movie protagonists stop at a single stab to a non-vital area, but we should have tried to keep going for the eyes before he kicked us away. A pen likely wouldn't penetrate deep enough to quickly end someone's life. We could have at least made fighting a lot more difficult for him, and with a damaged suit, he'd have a harder time escaping without being seen. A patrolling guard overhears the commotion and barges into Cecilia's cell. He orders her back into bed, but then notices the partially decloaked figure lurking in the corner. Unfortunately, he doesn't have time to scream before being disarmed and incapacitated with his own stun gun. Cecilia somehow manages to blow past Adrian into the hallway, only to be stopped by a pair of officers seemingly unaware of the situation. They attempt to drag her back to her cell, but are quickly subdued with a couple invisible haymakers. Backup arrives just in time to get absolutely wrecked without putting up a fight. Adrian casually executes the last officer with his own gun and exits through a nearby fire escape. Cecilia picks up a Glock 17 from the floor beside her and gives chase, just barely missing her mark as he runs down the stairs. She uses the gun to force her way through a security checkpoint before following Adrian out into the pouring rain. Unfortunately, the responding officers really didn't have much of a chance against an unstoppable cyber ninja. Those that survived should consider themselves extremely lucky. I get that Cecilia couldn't pick up the gun right away without getting smoked by one of the cops, but we had a prime opportunity to open fire while he was busy toying with the last of the officers. Just aim in the vicinity of the floating Glock. We have 17 chances to hit him, and by the looks of it, a single blow could damage the suit enough to make him visible. If we couldn't put Adrian down right then and there, we should just lay on the floor and wait for more units to arrive. Everything that just went down in the hallways was undoubtedly captured on camera, and only a complete idiot would believe a drug drugged 120-pound woman overpowered, disarmed, and eliminated 8 armed police officers. This incident should serve as all the proof we need to substantiate our claims and clear her name. The officers at the front desk should have immediately reported an active shooter situation and requested a SWAT team equipped with thermal cameras, which could easily be requisitioned from a local fire department if they didn't have them already. Chasing after Adrian was extremely reckless. We could have easily run into more armed guards that probably wouldn't appreciate us waving around a loaded gun, not to mention the fact that he could be waiting around any corner to ambush us. After missing another shot at a moving target, Cecilia finds herself wandering through a crowded parking lot. Suddenly, the silhouetted figure pops up right in front of her and pins her to the side of an ambulance. He warns her that if she continues to misbehave, he'll take it out on the people she loves, mentioning Sydney specifically. Another officer pops out from behind a nearby vehicle, but Adrian quickly guns him down. Despite being completely exposed from a suit malfunction, he walks right past the injured man without bothering to finish him off. You've already won. Put the gun down and turn yourself in. Adrian's long gone by now, and you're only risking being shot by the police, or legitimately becoming a murderer by shooting back at them. Yes, Adrian's ghost recon suit was caught on camera, but that doesn't mean Cecilia would not still be charged for shooting innocent people. Armed with the knowledge of where she'll be heading, Cecilia follows Adrian into the street where he nearly runs her down in an SUV. She puts a round into his vehicle, causing him to swerve into oncoming traffic and force another driver into an accident. Cecilia runs to the scene of the collision and helps herself to the injured man's car. He probably shouldn't be driving anyways. She dials James while swerving through the surface streets, warning him that Sydney's life is in danger. Standing still in the middle of the road to try and shoot Adrian before he could run her down was pretty ballsy. Yeah, he said he would only hurt those around us, but if we popped him before he swerved out of the way, we'd almost certainly wind up road pizza. It did indirectly get us a car, so points, I guess. In addition to calling James, I would have also called the police to let them know where I was going. Given everything that just went down at the secure treatment facility, they'd send an entire SWAT team after us regardless of whether they believed our story. We'll want the house to be completely surrounded in case Adrian tries to slip away. Back at James's house, Sydney's curled up in bed fast asleep when an invisible force jolts her awake. She briefly surveys the dark room before spraying her pepper spray at the shadows. The invisible intruder falls clattering into her dresser, giving her a chance to run screaming down the hallway before getting clotheslined. Just then, James pulls up in his unmarked cruiser. Gun drawn, he enters the house and begins clearing his way to Sydney's bedroom, finding her face up on the floor, getting the life squeezed out of her. The invisible attacker turns his attention to James, knocking him to the floor and then savagely beating him unconscious before his daughter's eyes. From out of nowhere, Cecilia runs into the hallway carrying a fire extinguisher. She empties the entire canister, exposing Adrian's silhouette. The target painted, Cecilia draws her borrowed Glock and dumps 4 rounds into his upper torso. Adrian staggers down the hallway towards Cecilia before crumbling to the floor in a bloody heap. He takes the room temperature challenge right there on the hardwood, and Cecilia crouches down to finally face her attacker. It's Tom? Nope, not buying it. Tom had zero motive to do all this. It's far more likely that Adrian coerced him into being the fall guy after his suit was exposed at the hospital. Adrian would have known that people would start digging into his death if the cloaking device were linked back to him, so he would need to establish a false narrative the police would latch onto. It's a good thing Sydney showed Cecilia where they keep the fire extinguisher. That was a pretty clutch move. Unfortunately, neither James nor his daughter could have possibly thought to try that without the knowledge of what they were up against. There really wasn't anything James could have done differently to avoid getting his ass beat. He's just lucky no one was able to stop us fleeing the scene of a massacre back at the secure treatment center. Given Tom kept coming after the first 4 shots, I would have pumped a few more into him. We don't know what the suit is capable of, and there's a world of difference between a wound that will eventually kill someone and one that will stop them from killing you. Sometime later, a SWAT team raids Adrian's home in the middle of the night. They hear muffled cries for help coming through a wall in the basement, breaking it down to find Adrian playing the role of Fortunato. The news gets back to Cecilia by way of James, but she doesn't buy it. She insists that Adrian was behind everything that she's been through, even going as far as to set his own brother up to die in James's house. That night, Cecilia devises a new plan. She arrives at Adrian's house to press him for a confession while James listens through the wire. She explains that if Adrian wants to be a part of her child's life, he needs to admit everything he did to her and her loved ones. Adrian won't budge, sticking with the story that his brother orchestrated the whole thing. Getting nowhere, Cecilia breaks down crying, prompting Adrian to come over and console her. Seemingly comforted by his presence, she excuses herself to the bathroom. As Adrian sits alone at the dinner table, something draws his attention off to the right. Suddenly, his own hand launches into his neck, dragging a steak knife across his throat in clear view of a nearby surveillance camera. He falls out of his chair, retching up his own blood. At that moment, Cecilia returns from the bathroom. screaming in horror before dialing 911 to report an attempted suicide. She then crouches beside Adrian as he breathes his last breath. Looking him dead in the eyes, she whispers, "Surprise." Having heard what transpired inside, James comes running up to the house ready to draw. Cecilia meets him in the doorway on her way out, explaining that Adrian cut his own throat. James reluctantly concurs, looking down to see that she's carrying another suit like the one on Tom. It seems pretty clear that getting Adrian to confess was never the intended outcome of this meeting. Frankly, I'm surprised he never discovered the other suit in the master bedroom closet after finding Cecilia hiding in there earlier. Of course, had he just used a reasonably secure password, she never would have been able to swipe it in the first place. Cecilia was careful to make Adrian's execution look like a suicide, and on camera no less, but leaving before an ambulance arrives will definitely come off as suspicious. Between her testimony, James's, and any eyewitnesses and security footage from back at the secure treatment center, there is substantial evidence to suggest that cloaking technology exists. The mere fact that she isn't being held for her sister's murder implies the police believe Emily was killed by someone using such a device, and now she was present in a house that likely contained examples of this equipment at the exact moment her estranged ex cut his own throat. Now, I'm not advocating murder, but we should have just suffered through dinner with Adrian and then taken the suit with us so we could come back for him once we established a firm alibi. At the very least, we could have stuck around to play the role of a grief-stricken girlfriend until paramedics hauled him off on a platter. The last thing we need after surviving this nightmare is to wind up behind bars for murdering the guy that tortured us this whole time. As Cecilia leaves Adrian's home carrying one of the cloaking suits, it's clear she feels justice was served. However, some might argue killing Adrian was unnecessary. After all, Cecilia would be well prepared for any future attacks, and he would undoubtedly be the primary suspect should anything happen to her. Again, I'm not suggesting murder should always be the first option, but given what we've seen of Adrian's capacity for ruthlessness, it's safe to say he was prepared to take things even further. Without knowing everything he's capable of, the only way to ensure Adrian is no longer a threat would be to permanently remove him from the situation, and it doesn't get much more permanent than death. But what do you think? Could you have gone on living knowing Adrian was still out there? Let me know in the comments. Regardless of what we did in the end, I think had we gone to the police with Adrian's phone, and especially the second suit from his house, we probably could have prevented Emily's death, thus sparing any of the officers that might have been killed during the onslaught at the hospital. Tom's death seems unavoidable, as Adrian's carefully crafted plan likely set him up to die from the very beginning. In the end, I think the psycho stalker from The Invisible Man was beaten. Thanks for watching, and remember, don't use easily guessable passwords.